Hello comrades, and welcome to another devlog of Payday 2 NQR. And in this video we are finally gonna be talking about the stuff, the juice, the reason for all of this, which is gun autism. We're gonna go over the current progress on how weapon stats are reworked, which will give us the base for talking about basically everything else. This is obviously a work in progress, so the stuff might change, and the stuff will change, so keep that in mind. This video is gonna be just a huge gap fest, so not a whole lot of showing and a whole lot of talking, because there's a lot to talk about, so let's just get into it. So why am I even reworking stats? Well, obviously with this mod I'm aiming for much closer to real-life gunplay, and in terms of accessorizing and modifying your gun, I want those decisions to be much more sort of common sense driven. Obviously, it's still gonna be like a little arcadey, a little gamey, not gonna be like insanely realistic, because I'm not trying to make something like an Escape from Tarkov out of Payday 2, but still, I just want stuff to make sense in this context, in this kind of situation that the game puts us in. And so in order to achieve that, I obviously need some completely new stats that just was not a concern in the game before, just wasn't a thing. And besides that, in order to make the existing stats significantly more flexible and easier to work with, I've had to basically rewrite, completely rewrite on the back end how the game handles weapon stats. Because if you didn't know, in vanilla Payday 2, stats are basically stored as a table of every single possible value that is assigned to an index in this table. So let's say in vanilla game you have a gun with a damage of 50 and then you have a muzzle device that increases the damage by 10 points, which results in 60 points. The game actually doesn't think about it as pure like numbery values. The game actually stores all the possible damage values in a table, and every single value has an index assigned to it. So the gun doesn't actually have 50 damage assigned to it. The gun has, like, let's say, a 5th place in the table of damages, which results in 50 damage. And then when you put a mod that increases the damage, it doesn't add up to the resulting value. It actually adds up to a table index. Like, let's say it does +1 to an index of the damage. And then the game looks up in this table like a summary index of it. It takes like the gun's 5th index plus 1 index from your weapon mod, and then it looks up through the table what value it should result in. So it's a complete fucking mess, to be honest, which I immediately thought that I had to like completely get rid of that system. Well, I didn't have to, I just did it, to be honest, because I thought it would be neater. And this obviously allows the stats to be actually whatever the hell I want them to be, precisely. And this allows me to do a bit more math than just addition and subtraction of table indexes. So now let's work our way through the stats themselves. First off is weight, probably the primary factor in how your gun is going to be handling. The weight value is assigned to each and every gun and to basically every single weapon part of every single gun in the game. Some of those weight values are gonna be relative if we're talking about parts that are unique to a gun or family of guns, in the sense that the base would be a 0 and then something else would be a +1 or -1, etc. And for the rest, the majority that you can actually swap out or put on a gun are gonna have absolute weight values. The way the number itself is represented is a bit arbitrary at the moment, but I'm gonna figure it out a bit later. There is a couple of advantages to having a heavier gun, but obviously, generally, even in the context of not having to carry your gun around across the mountain or something, still, a heavier gun is mostly a negative. So the more weight, the worse. And if we compare that to our shotgun right there, so 34 weight is marked as a red color, because it's worse than having 27 weight. The way it is done in NQR at the moment is that weight puts a little teeny tiny penalty on your movement speed, but besides that, obviously mostly it negatively affects your handling with the weapon itself. specifically the scale of weapon sway, which will make it harder for you to swing around your gun while trying to aim. It also lowers the kind of visual responsiveness of your gun. Has a pretty noticeable effect on weapon equip speed and sprint outing, which is tied to equipping speed. Only affects the reload speed a tiny bit, but that mostly comes down to the weight of the magazine part itself, if there is a detachable magazine involved. Also, when increasing the weight drastically, you're gonna notice a slight change in the amount of visual head bob shaker, which we went over in the movement devlog. Besides that, the advantages of a heavier gun, with everything else being equal, is a little bit less recoil and a little bit more melee damage. Next up, length, described with a decimal amount of inches, is not actually assigned to guns. Instead, it is only assigned to every single weapon part that could contribute to overall gun's length. In our case, those would be stocks, receivers, and barrel extensions. And then it also adds up a length of the barrel itself, which is a separate stat that we are gonna get to later. Obviously, things like foregrips do not contribute to overall length of the gun, although they will have a length stat, but for a bit different thing. But for overall length, that's obviously because a foregrip cannot be longer than a barrel. I mean, you could put a foregrip that is longer than your barrel, but that would be suboptimal, and I kind of advocate for a freedom of customization of the gun in this mod, but still, that thing is what I don't allow. So we already went over the wall push mechanic in the previous video, go watch it if you haven't, which is what length affects. In short, with a longer gun, you're gonna more often smack it against obstacles or enemies, and in this state, not gonna be able to use your gun at crucial moments. So a longer gun is usually a more effective gun in terms of how well it shoots. But in terms of handling a longer gun, it obviously way more cumbersome and unwieldy. And that's why length also additionally affects all your handling speeds, like equipping a gun, sprint outing with a gun, and since the wall push thing also uses the same sprint outing, animation, and timers, it also affects that. And also the equipping the gun thing, if you remember the stuff from the previous video, you're not only seeing that when changing guns. There could be, depending on how you're gonna play, a lot of instances of something else, like a third-party force, make you re-equip your gun. And that could be at a very inconvenient moment where you really want to use your gun and you're not gonna be able to for quite some time. All of this additionally kind of adds up to your motivation of not wanting to have a heavy, long, big kind of gun. And speaking of big, next up is the size stat, which is basically just a vanilla concealment, but, you know, the opposite. So the vanilla has multiple instances of so-called reversed stats, namely the concealment, accuracy, and stability, which are obviously made this way to kind of carry the idea to the player that the more the better, to make the player better understand the concept of advantages and disadvantages of something. The more the better. But if you think about it here, for example, with concealment, concealment is not actually a stat. Concealment doesn't exist. Concealment cannot be measured. It's not what is being measured. What is being measured here is size. Size is what exists, and size is what can be measured. If you kind of reverse the idea of size into concealment, then you kind of have to make up the boundaries of this stat. Like, for example, what the fuck is a zero concealment? Like, how big is something that is zero concealment? Or the other way around, if something is the size of a single molecule, then how much concealment that is? Why is that a 30 or 33 or whatever? So those are arbitrary values that are not clear, they don't convey any idea, they don't make any sense. And that's why, again, in order for them to become much more flexible, easier to work with, easier to convey an idea of what a player is working with, I had to sort of unreverse them. Okay, so all this tangent just to say that the size currently doesn't really work. Obviously because size primarily gonna affect stealth, and there is no stealth in NQR yet. Apologies to my solo stealth, all it possible kind of guys. Stealth is not a priority of this mod. I will get stealth back before the 1.0 release, of course, but way later. This is why I have 99 detection risk, by the way, because, well, You could try the stealth, I just haven't done anything with it. It's like purely vanilla. Could be broken, I haven't even tested it. But yeah, you could try it, but you're gonna be detected like instantly by anybody, which might be a challenge for you, but I wouldn't advise it. But anyway, yeah, besides that, size is going to affect all your weapon handling speeds a little teeny tiny bit. Obviously, because the size itself, like, doesn't really matter a whole lot, like, aside from weight and length. Like, if the gun is theoretically, like, very light and very short, but insanely big, that, first of all, probably isn't really possible to have that much of a difference between those, and even then, not gonna be a huge penalty. The size of the magazine, however, again, really affects your reload speed, along with the weight of the magazine. Okay, so next up, the caliber. Caliber is, it's not just like a piece of text, like for your information, like what the gun uses in real life or whatever, like a little trivia. No, it is a stat that actually defines your entire gun. And it could be changed on some guns, in some cases, and it's going to affect everything. So obviously the word itself, caliber, you can do a actually moment here. Like the word itself means basically just a diameter. In the context of firearms, it's either the diameter of the projectile itself, or it is the diameter of the bore of a barrel of the gun that a projectile flies through. But obviously here I'm using this as a more like broader term of a caliber, meaning a type of cartridge that the gun is configured to be fed with. In this case, this NQR rifle is configured to be fed with 5.56x45, as it is usual for AR-15 kind of family of rifles, M4s and stuff. And 5.56x45 in itself doesn't mean a whole lot, it's just the name of a standard by which you can make a cartridge that could be fit in a gun that is configured to use that kind of cartridges. And by extension, in a 5.56x45 round, there could be anything. So there is a dedicated stats table in NQR, a table that consists of every single caliber that every existing Payday 2 gun uses. Each caliber entry in this table has two things stored in them. First is the caliber's class, of which there are three main ones: rifle, shotgun, and pistol. This is primarily to be used with the new ammo looting system, which you can see in the gameplay showcase video. And the second thing each caliber has is a description of every ammo type of this caliber that exists in the game. There are really not many of them. In fact, most of the calibers just have a single ammo type of FMJ, which is kind of the default. The most stuff we have are shotgun rounds, and as you can see in the case of 12 gauge, the default is not an FMJ, is a 00 buck, and then we have a little assortment of vanilla shotgun rounds type, and the category was renamed respectively. And so this description of an ammo type of a certain caliber is what actually contains the data necessary to determine how effective a fired bullet would be. And this is all just a real-world data of a certain type of round of a certain caliber. The data like projectile weight, projectile shape, amount of projectiles, if there's more than one, and a so-called terminal ballistics data, which is just a muzzle velocity over projectile measured at a certain barrel length, because it depends on the barrel length. And it also contains the weight of the entire round in order to determine how heavy a fully loaded magazine would be of whatever capacity loaded with those rounds. And I forgot to mention that the caliber is predetermined for every gun, and then it could be changed with weapon mods potentially, and then the ammo type is chosen by default out of every possible ammo type of a given caliber, and then it could be changed with weapon mods separately. So then we quickly jump to barrel stat. So obviously this is the barrel length, again same as overall length, measured in inches, and is predetermined for every single barrel part of every single weapon in the game. And since the overall length stat takes the barrel length into account, then if you change your barrel length, it's gonna affect the overall length, obviously. Barrel length can only be influenced by swapping the barrel itself. It cannot be like extended by some other weapon mod category, like a barrel extension or something. It doesn't work like that. And so only after all that we have the data we need to then determine the actual important stuff. This trio right here: the damage, the spread, which is again unreversed vanilla accuracy, and muzzle rise, which is unreversed vanilla stability. These three are not described anywhere, not in the gun, not in weapon parts, nothing influences them directly. These are completely fabricated as a result of calculation of the rest of the gun's stats. So the damage, obviously kind of hard to simply define in relation to a real-world firearm performance, but I've tried thinking about it and kind of come to the conclusion that the simplest way to define the gun's potential damage would be to, obviously, for the damage to be just a digested value of kinetic energy that the bullet will have. So the faster the projectile moves and the heavier it is, the more kinetic energy it transfers to the target. And the key word here is potential damage. So obviously when talking about the ability of a bullet to take out a human target, there's a lot more to it than just the amount of energy. You can say there's stuff like bullet fragmentation inside the body, or bullet penetration ability, or even over-penetration. There's all these nerdy ballistic stuff like temporal wound cavities and all those things. And even like the question of what does it actually mean to kill? Like, does a person just dies when it gets hit by enough bullets? Well, no. There's obviously gonna be things like incapacitation or hitting vital organs and bleeding out of different scale. And all those questions are good questions when talking about, there's no such thing as damage of a gun, this is all gamified and stuff. But what I'm trying to say is that the bullet doesn't really know a whole lot about all this stuff. Like, the bullet is just a piece of metal that flies at a certain speed. And the way a target reacts to being hit, if there's a whole lot of complexities to it, then all this science should be evaluated at a level of a target. And that's why I was saying that the amount of damage of the gun here is potential, because after you send this amount of damage to a human target, the way it's gonna react and the amount of damage it's gonna receive is gonna depend on quite a few things. And we are gonna talk about it, of course, in the video about enemies. But going back to the value of damage itself, we obviously have now all the data of our ammo type, including projectile weight and projectile speed, adjusted to current barrel length stat, which is going to calculate it by a certain formula into a potential amount of kinetic energy and then translate it to the amount of damage. So every time you change either caliber, ammo type, or barrel length, the rest is being re-evaluated. And before we continue, I'm going to need to touch upon some of the hidden stats. So obviously there's a whole bunch of new stuff happening in the back end, but there is a number of hidden weapon stats that are hidden not because of my choice to hide them, but primarily because I don't have any more fucking space to put them in the menu. And also because they are quite simple, probably mostly not gonna be dynamic, not gonna be changeable, and are quite simple in their definitions. Those are some of the stuff that define a weapon's ergonomic properties or some of the technical design features. For example, whether the gun is opened bolt or whether the gun is a bullpup. But the ones that interest us today is, for example, a weapon's action type. So the action just describes how the gun basically works, like what drives it. You're probably familiar at least with terms like bolt action, pump action, lever action. Those are all options of action type. Obviously it's defined for every single gun and is not a subject to be changed. It just defines like what the gun is. There's also stuff like blowback action or roller delayed or moving barrel. There's also mechanical for stuff like revolvers, where your pull of the trigger or the hammer is what makes the gun shoot. There's also Gatling, which is pretty self-explanatory. And if this is none of that, if I didn't forget anything, then this is just your regular gas-operated locking bolt kind of stuff. Those purely string text values do not define anything by themselves, but when we are calculating our spread, for example, we obviously have a certain formula, which I just came up with, by the way. It's not like real science involved in here. Besides, I don't think there is any like real scientific formula to calculate the amount of spread of a gun, because there's just so much more unpredictable factors that go into it. But the ones I'm using are current barrel length, obviously, a weight of the projectile taken from a current ammo type data, projectile shape, which is not a huge factor, but still, projectile amount, big difference if there's more than one projectile in a single cartridge. This is for shotguns, obviously. And the action factor, so depending on how gun operates, the accuracy might be better or worse. Again, not a huge thing, but might be noticeable. So here's a little neat example for you. So we have two different pistols, a Glock 17 and an M13, both using 9mm FMJ and both configured to have exactly the same length of barrel, and as you can see, the damage turned out to be exactly the same, because again, same round, same barrel length. That's basically all we need to determine the damage. But the thing that's different about them is the type of action. Glock 17 uses a so-called moving barrel type of action, because the barrel needs to tilt back and down to unlock the slide. And the M13 uses a so-called roller delayed type of action, which is not actually roller delayed. I know this is delayed blowback or piston delayed, but for the sake of simplicity and in our context here, this means that the barrel is fixed, which will result in a little bit more accuracy. And as you can see here, the spread is a little bit better. But the thing is, actually, if we even shorten the barrel down to its default 4.1 inches, the spread got a little bit worse, but it's still better than a Glock. And so the exact balancing of all those factors, again, is quite a bit gamified here. I don't actually care a whole lot about whether a Glock with a longer barrel is more accurate in real life than an M13. Because as I said, there is a lot more unpredictability to it in real life than in a game like this. So keeping it simplified and considering all the factors that I've mentioned, everything else being equal, a fixed barrel should be more accurate than a not fixed barrel. How much accurate? Well, that's debatable, and this is a subject to change. The way the value of spread is represented is very, very roughly inspired by the amount of MOA. If you know, you know, but in reality, by that I mean in the game, the amount of spread is nowhere near close to represent like real MOAs. Like, this is heavily gamified kind of MOA. The guns are still fairly accurate, like in general, in NQR, especially shotguns are a lot more accurate than your average, you know, arcadey kinda shooter game, which vanilla Payday 2 very much is. Alright, moving on to muzzle rise. Somebody could probably guess why I didn't call it recoil, and I'm gonna get to it. Primarily, this is what stability in vanilla Payday actually means, the amount of muzzle rise. And actually, in like most games, the amount of recoil is how much the gun rises up when you are shooting, or also a little bit sideways. The number itself obviously is arbitrary here, but roughly represents the amount of angle the gun tilts up or to the side. The calculation, again, involves a formula which depends on the previously calculated amount of energy adjusted to a current barrel length, the weight, the overall weight of the gun, the action is quite a factor, and a so-called rise factor. This is another hidden weapon stat. So you probably heard about the term bore axis, and the less of it, the less potential muzzle climb a handgun is gonna have. But the problem is that the bore axis only applies to primarily handguns, or in general to guns without stock that are not shouldered. So when this principle is applied to pistols, the point of contact here obviously means how high you can put your hand on the pistol grip. But when we're talking about shouldered kind of rifles with a stock, here I am calculating the center mass of the bolt, which might not be exactly in line with the barrel. Like, the bolt on many guns is actually higher than the axis of the bolt, and so the center mass is higher too. And then additionally, the main point of contact here being your shoulder, also on some, especially older guns, is significantly lower than even the axis of the barrel, and compared to the axis of the bolt, the center mass of the bolt, it's even lower than that. And so on those kind of rifles, especially when the bolt hits back and its center mass is that much higher than the point of contact of the stock with your shoulder, it usually results in a noticeably more muzzle rise. The difference is not going to be insane or anything, but with enough experience, you're probably going to notice how, like for example, AR-15 kind of rifles like your M4s are shooting quite a bit more flat than other rifles, something like AKs, just because of how in line all of the action is, like the barrel and then the circular bolt right behind it, and then it recoils back into the stock, into the buffer tube, right where your shoulder contacts the stock. Doesn't mean, of course, that the gun is just not gonna climb up at all, but the difference is still there. Also, I need to mention that different barrel extensions are affecting muzzle rise, but for you to be able to see the amount of that effect is not implemented yet. So if you thought that I didn't call this recoil because weapons recoil consists not only of rise up but also kick back, then you would be correct. So this is another hidden stat of muzzle kick, which I'm most likely gonna unhide later. So you have two different recoils and they are not entirely interconnected with each other. So muzzle rise is simple enough, you just move the camera up, but how do you actually represent a weapon kick back? Well, obviously with a screen shake, which was a feature in vanilla, but there it was fixed and predetermined for every gun, and I don't think there was any control over it. And here it's gonna be dynamic, and also, again, it's not predetermined anymore, anywhere, like it's completely calculated from the ground up. And here all the factors in the formula are actually exactly the same as in calculation of muzzle rise. It's just the formula is a bit different and the factors are matter in a different way. And also the rise factor here is actually reversed, so the more rise factor you have, the more muzzle rise you're gonna have, the less kick you're gonna have, because more of this energy of moving the bolt back and the bolt hitting back, the more energy of it is transferred for upward movement and not the lateral backward movement. So with everything else being equal, if the gun is shooting pretty flat, you're gonna feel the kick a bit more because the energy has to go somewhere. But then actually what happens is that the resulting amount of kick is gonna transfer a little bit of its energy to the muzzle rise, kind of as a bonus, because even if your gun is like perfectly flat shooting, it's still gonna shift your point of aim kind of up and back a little, because of the leverage of your spine on the pelvis axis. I think, again, as I've said, the source is that I made it the fuck up. Like all of this is subject to change and I'm open for discussions. As you can probably notice, I love this sort of stuff, but this is all coming from my, years of firearms knowledge and with a little bit of gamifying and balancing and all this stuff. Okay, let's move on. We're almost there. Magazine. How could I possibly be so autistic about such a simple stat? Well, magazine stat is no longer predefined for guns. Instead, it is predefined for every single magazine of every single weapon in the game. And when it gets the base weapon stats, it instead just scans the default blueprint of the weapon and then finds a default magazine and grabs the capacity of that magazine. So if I change what magazine the weapon has by default, the base stat of magazine capacity of the quote-unquote gun is also going to change. And the funny quirk with that is that a single magazine can have multiple capacities assigned to it if the magazine is designed to be working with multiple different calibers. So when we are getting the capacity of a magazine of a certain gun, when requesting its base stats, we also before that need to know what caliber the gun is using. A simple example with that would be an M4 kind of rifle, which is chambered by default in 5.56x45 caliber, and its default magazine of 30 rounds for a regular Stanag mag would be 30 5.56 rounds, but then you can rechamber it or caliber convert it to 50 Beowulf, for example, if you heard about it, and so you can use the same Stanag mags that usually fit 30 5.56 rounds in them. But if you convert it to 50 Beowulf, then the same mag is gonna fit 10 50 Beowulf rounds. So that way the very same magazine can have multiple different capacities assigned to it, depending on the caliber. If it so happens that the gun is fitted with a magazine that is designed to be used with a certain caliber rounds, and then we convert the gun to a caliber that this magazine doesn't accept, then the resulting magazine capacity would be 0. And here's a rare example of this case. So here's our Big One or Groza, and it uses a 9x39 by default and this funny looking magazine. If we would change this caliber to 5.45x39, which is a regular AK-74 kind of round, a Groza can be configured to be firing this round. We get a 0 magazine capacity because this mag is not designed to be used with 5.45. But if we fit it with our regular AK mag, for example this Speedpool mag, then we get our capacity back of 30 rounds, or in case of quad stack mag, 60 rounds of 5.45. If we then change our caliber back to 9x39, again the capacity is 0 because those 545 or 762 mags are not compatible with 9x39. And if we remove our mag, then the default mag is again 20 rounds of 9x39. And by the way, in the case of AK kind of rifles, they are both 545 and 762 compatible, all of them. And magazines, I've decided to make them cross-compatible with both of those calibers. But 9x39 here is an exception. As you probably could imagine, there's a lot more gun nerdery involved in all of this, which I'm not gonna get too deep into in this video. So all the magazine values are absolute. There is no like addition or subtraction going on. They are all the way they are in a vacuum. So same as the barrel, you can only change the barrel length by swapping the barrel, and the magazine, you can change the capacity of the magazine by swapping a magazine. With a little caveat that just a few of the weapons in the game have a separate weapon mod category called magazine extensions, which are adding up to the existing value of magazine capacity. And that's pretty much it. Moving on to spare ammo, which is just a rename of total ammo from vanilla. The amount of spare ammo is quite a bit dynamic, and the renaming came from the design decision of always having like a single mag loaded into the gun and then having at the very least some amount of ammo in your spare. And both inventory and in-game HUD represent that by default instead of vanilla, where you can see your spare ammo as actually your total ammo including your current magazine, which is a little confusing. Here, as you can see, we represent the amount of ammo by representing the amount of spare magazines. And please don't get me wrong here, I don't have any like crazy Tarkov-like simulation of dedicated magazines and the amount of ammo in each of those mags separately. It's just the amount of overall ammo in your spare, and this is just a neat way to show it. But the calculation of this amount of ammo is actually coming from the amount of magazines times the magazine capacity. And where do we get this amount of spare mags? Well, it's unsurprisingly coming from a specific magazine. Yes, the amount of spare ammo depends on the chosen magazine. Nothing too crazy about it, there's just like an imaginary kind of amount of certain types of magazines that you can carry on your loadout. So in this example, with your M4 style rifle mags, you can carry 4 by default. And for example, if you are going to change your magazine to, let's say, a quad stack, which is double the capacity but roughly double the thickness, then your spare amount of mags are becoming 2 instead of 4. But actually your total capacity is going to be increased because you are carrying the same 120 rounds on your body, but then your gun has additional mag, which is now double the size. And if you choose a 100 rounds drum magazine for your M4, your spare ammo is going to be 1 mag, and your overall ammo capacity is going to be increased even further because you have 100 rounds on your body, which is less, but the gun itself has another 100 rounds, so for a total of 200. But then if you're going to say, well, 4 30-round mags is not enough for me, I just want to carry more ammo, I know it's going to be heavier loadout, but I just want to stuff myself with more mags. Well, a solution to that is in the works, but for the time being, there's going to be like a default understanding of amount of ammo that you can carry on you. So obviously not every gun uses mags though, so that's why for some weapons we just have like a regular plain amount of ammunition. That basically works for every gun that is being reloaded like a shotgun with 1x1. The actual amount is, again, roughly evaluated to the same kind of idea of a default amount of ammunition in the loadout. And in this case, the amount depends on the caliber that is used, not the magazine, of course. There's also a way to increase your spare ammo with weapon mods by using this shell rack kind of mod. And a funny little quirk with that is that you can sometimes do this with weapons that use magazines, but they are adding singular ammunition onto a gun, which means your spare mags amount is becoming decimal. Because the gun in this example is being fed by 10 round capacity magazines, adding up 6 rounds onto the rifle itself results in an additional 0.6 mag, which you will see in the total stats screen. But then the gun nerdery gets layered up, so if you go back to this rifle and try to change its caliber, of which the capacity of the magazine is going to be different now, in this case 5 rounds of 338 LaPo Magnum, if we're adding 6 rounds onto a rifle, this will result in an additional 1.2 spare mags. And that's it. Rate of fire, there's actually nothing crazy about it yet. It is predetermined for every gun. Might have changed in some cases compared to vanilla. Completely non-dynamic as of now. You cannot affect it with anything. You are gonna be able to change it with a couple of things later. You could notice the absence of a reload stat, because holy shit, reloading is the most complex mechanic in the entire mod. I'm not even sure yet that I want to mess with trying to display kind of like a reload time as a stat. Let's just say that there are hidden stats that determine the type of magazine release, type of bolt release. It is tied to being a bullpup. There's just so much stuff, and it's not even 100% finished yet, so there's also no optimal range stat, because range and like damage scaling is not a thing in the mod yet. It's going to be, but not going to be a huge deal. And I've disabled the vanilla stuff related to range, because it's bullshit. And there's also no threat stat, which is pretty much broken at the moment. I am going to reuse it in a bit more clear sort of way. But the important stuff is there. Again, work in progress. But yeah, we made it. That's gonna be it for now. Again, as usual, I'm gonna be glad to hear your thoughts or suggestions in the comments. Thank you all for watching / listening to this probably long-ass video. Wish you all the best. Take care.